Seamus Clifford, who's the head of Witchery Affairs really here in the department. So I think Minister McEntee will say a few words, followed by Minister Brown, and then we'll open up to questions.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to the Department of Justice. Really pleased to outline just some of the elements of the Justice vote for this year. Maybe the overall figure in that we have an allocation of €3.3 billion, which is obviously an increase on last year of about 3%, which I think is generally positive as this impacts on all parts of our Justice vote. I won't run through the entire allocation, but maybe just to pick out some of the key areas across the various different votes. 2.14 billion of that goes directly to An Garda Síochána's vote. That's an increase of 78 million on last year, and I think most tangibly from that will allow us to ensure 1,000 new Gardaí can go into Templemore next year, obviously helping to increase our overall Garda footprint and presence, and that'll be supported by 430 Garda staff, building again on the numbers of just under 3,100 that we currently have at the moment. We'll have a further recruitment campaign next year as well to make sure that the 11,000 men and women who applied this year, that we will continue to have that steady stream to be able to put those numbers through Templemore full stop. The Community Safety Innovation Fund, which was first is only being administered in the coming weeks, started with a fund of 2 million last year and will increase by 50%. So next year, €3 million of funding that has come from assets seized through CAB from criminals will go directly back into our communities, which I think is a really positive element. On domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, we have an increase of 22% overall. That's an increase of 9 million. Maybe just to break it down slightly, 7 million of that will be directly for TUSLA services, so current services dealing with their current demand and I suppose need to expand given the requirement to expand, but also 1.3 million will be specific to supporting development of new services as well as the development of our national strategy. We then have €2 million which will be broken down into the establishment of our new domestic violence agency, but also additional funding for victims of crime, awareness raising campaigns, to make sure that we can communicate and obviously engage with people around the whole preventative model. In terms of prisons, this is the first time in quite a number of years that we have funding allocated specifically to increase the number of prison officers, as well as 2 million to provide flexibility for that staff, but also to provide additional resources within the prison service. We have additional funding to support our efforts with Ukraine, our immigration system in general. We have now reached a figure of over 50,000 people that have come from Ukraine, and we are close to 10,000 international protection applicants, which when you compare it to a general average of about 3,000 most years, that's obviously a significant increase. So we have €9.2 million is being allocated, as well as €18 million for the IPO to increase our capabilities and our response, not just for those coming from Ukraine, but also international protection applicants, making sure that they're processed as quickly as possible and that we have as streamlined a system as possible. In terms of our court service, we have additional funding to develop the modernisation programme, which is well underway, being delivered by the court service. There's 2.5 million being allocated there, but also we have €2.5 million being allocated for additional staff to prepare the ground for the fact that we will have a report very soon outlining the additional judges, the additional staff that's required to meet what is a demanding area. Finally, then the cost of living, I suppose engaging with and really understanding the importance of the nighttime economy to our overall economy and to this to our country full stop. We wanted to acknowledge the challenges that they faced over the last number of years, and so working with Minister Paschal Donoghue, we have halved the special exemption orders. So instead of €410 a night, it will be reduced to 205 for special exemption orders, so that nightclubs, late bars, discos can stay open later. And obviously I'll be bringing forward new legislation on licensing reform, which will complement that, and obviously we'll go further in other areas, and I can explain that in a few weeks' time, hopefully. So I'll stop there and maybe hand over to my colleague Minister Brown, who obviously has responsibility for a number of key areas.
Thanks very much. As Minister McEntee has pointed out, the Justice budget for 2023 prioritised in particular community safety And I welcome the allocation of €24 million for youth justice, which is an increase of €2.5 million on the previous year, and that will have a significant impact on individual young lives and their families, and in particular their communities as well. And I cannot emphasise strongly enough the importance of these youth diversion projects and the services they provide, and the youth workers, early intervention workers and family support workers employed in them to help young people in their communities. I've seen very much at first hand the enormous life-changing changes that these youth diversion projects can have on young people in terms of helping to change their behaviour and in terms of making their lives a lot easier and putting them on a much more better pathway and changing their behaviour. And what they do is provide support around education, around training, and of course around employment, and to show that young people there are better opportunities out there. A lot of young people who often end up in difficult situations have at times chaotic family backgrounds, or are coming from very much from a trauma-informed backgrounds as well, and they need that little bit of direction and a little bit of support to help them to put them onto a better pathway, as I say, in their lives, and including some sporting activities as well to help them. And my aim very much under the youth justice strategy is to ensure that we have full youth justice service right across the country, those youth workers in place, but also the family support workers and early intervention workers as well. We already have a number of them in place, and they are proven to be very, very effective. The other area under my concern is the gambling regulator. We appointed a CEO designate, Anne-Marie Caulfield, a number of weeks ago, and we had this morning Mr. Andrew Rhodes, the gambling regulator from the UK, over, and we had a very important meeting this morning about the lessons that can be learned from the UK. The establishment of the new authority obviously is key for the programme of government, and ensuring when the legislation is enacted that we have that very powerful, very flexible regulator in place that can help to protect young people. And it's about creating a situation of fair and safe gambling in this country. So the allocation this year is 1 million, which brings the total allocation to 1.7 million to allow Ms Anne-Marie Caulfield to get, as CEO designate, to get the Gambling Regulatory Authority up and running and ready to dovetail once the legislation is passed, that the regulator is in place and we can start challenging a very serious situation around problem gambling for young people. Thank you.
Maybe just to clarify, the 3% overall increase is for An Garda Síochána. It's 5% overall for the justice vote. Just to clarify.
Any questions? Shane Field?
So last year's budget, and there was a pledge for 800 additional Gardaí, and we had the GRA coming out last night basically saying that we've yet to see a large proportion of that number actually coming through training, and some of the figures I've heard suggest that there's only been a fraction of that coming through training. So can I ask the Minister, how many recruits have actually come through training this year, and how realistic is it to set a 1,000 recruit target next year, and is there particular difficulties with recruitment at the moment?
Thanks. So you're right, we haven't had the full 800 through this year. It's not through lack of investment or I think lack of determination to have that happen. We had a recruitment campaign which was completed earlier on this year, but I think took a little bit longer. 11,000 members obviously, or men and women, applied through that recruitment campaign. We still had an overhang of COVID-19 where we weren't able to have the normal numbers or the full capacity numbers going through Templemore as we would like. So it has meant that I think if you look at the completed, those that have completed or begun training, it's about 460. So it's not the 800. I appreciate that. The reason that we are confident, and I'm confident that we will have the 1,000, is that we have gotten to the stage through the Public Appointments Service where we will have that 200 every 3 months. It does require the Public Appointments Service doing a significant number of interviews throughout those 3 months, but I think, as was the case in the past where we had quite a good rolling number going through the college, once we start that process we will be able to get the 200 in every 3 months, starting with February, so you then have 5 different stages across next year, to make sure that we have that continuous number. On top of the 11,000 that applied, we'll be opening a new recruitment campaign next year to make sure that we have that steady flow and that steady stream. So as I said, it's not through lack of commitment or determination or want on anybody's part, or indeed lack of funding. There were overhangs from COVID and the recruitment campaign, which I suppose getting those numbers in and getting the PAS process started project was slightly delayed, but I do believe we're now at the stage where we should have what I hope will be a well-oiled machine, where we'll have 200 in every 3 months, and that will help us reach 1,000. Obviously, I mean, we're at a figure of about 14,300 at the moment. We want to get to 15,000, and I think that will help us certainly by the end of next year be getting closer to that overall target. Yeah.
Just on those Garda numbers, we've heard complaints from the Garda Representative Association they see that lots of people leaving the Garda, and people don't know the actual number of Garda fell this year. Are you worried that the rigours of the job, the bureaucracy of the job, the pay conditions will make it harder to reach that 15,000 figure as people continue to leave?
Well, look, I think you naturally have you have retirements, which is part of the numbers that we've seen drop in the last year or so, and you'll have more retirements between now and next year. I think we are in a changing world in that more generally people tend to move around different jobs and tend not to stay in the same employment for as long as they would have in the past. In saying that, the fact that 11,000 men and women applied to become members of An Garda Síochána, I think shows I suppose the manner in which An Garda Síochána are held, and that people do still see it as a very positive and a very good career and something that people want to be part of. And certainly the members of An Garda Síochána that I meet, and indeed the members even this morning in Killishy House in Kildare of the superintendents, they are very proud of the work that they do, and I think most of them would say it is a fantastic career and a fantastic job to do, and obviously it's hugely rewarding. So in saying that, a lot of the money that we're putting into the Garda vote this year, it is to support them in the work that they're doing to make it easier for the Gardaí to do their work. So investment in IT, investment in body-worn cameras to keep them safe, developing new legislation to make sure that the structures are there to support them. So all of this, I think, is beneficial in encouraging people to apply and encouraging people to think of this as a career path for them. But as I said, we have had challenges in the last 2 years. The fact that we haven't been able to put the numbers through Templemore that we would like or that would have been normal has impacted on the overall recruitment. But I do believe that we're turning a corner.
If you put a date on when you hope to reach the 15,000 figure. Sorry.
I can't give you an exact date, but I think by the end of next year we'll be getting very close to it. And as I've said this morning, I would like to see that number go even higher, but I think we reach the 15,000 first and then we go beyond it. But I think by the end of next year we should be getting very close to that.
And just one more, if I may. You mentioned the refugee numbers and the asylum seeker numbers. Do you see that easing in the near future, or are these numbers going to continue to come in the same volumes? And also, would you be in favour of admitting Russian asylum seekers who were fleeing the conscription over there?
Maybe just to break that down into 3 different areas. So I mentioned that the number of people coming from Ukraine has now reached 50,000. The numbers coming on a weekly basis has slowed down, but nonetheless they are still numbers that are arriving, or people who are arriving seeking our help. So that obviously will depend on what's happening in Ukraine, and I think that's very difficult for anybody to comprehend or predict how things will happen over the next few weeks and months. In terms of the international protection numbers, I do believe that this is probably a more permanent change. The idea that we have for many years, and notwithstanding COVID, had in and around 3,000 to 4,000 applicants, and we are now at 10,000. It's not unique to Ireland. We're seeing those numbers change right across Europe, and I think that's just a representation of a changing environment, a changing world, and many global challenges that people are facing, climate being one of them, war obviously in not just Ukraine but other parts of the world, and people seeking asylum. So we need to be able to respond. That's why we have a significant budget here, an additional allocation, not just to respond on a once-off basis, but to expand our teams, the number of people we have dealing with applications. But we also need to make sure that we're very focused on the root cause of these challenges, and I know that's something Minister Coveney, particularly in dealing with his colleagues in Africa, but also right across Europe, the Migration Pact, I suppose developing new procedures to try and support people at the point of departure. That's a huge focus, not just for the Department of Foreign Affairs, but right across the board. But I do think it's probably a changing trend, and one that is not unique to Ireland. So, I mean, so far to date, Ireland has not closed its doors, shall we say, to people coming from Russia. The vast majority of people that were applying for visas, the vast majority are family reunification or joint family visas. So Irish citizens married to Russian nationals or citizens where they're coming over to Ireland. There's a wider discussion, I think, happening, and Charles Michel obviously discussed it this week at a European level as to whether or not we would, I suppose, support Russian citizens who were seeking asylum. But I think that needs to be looked at in a wider context. In the same way our response to Ukraine was a decision taken at a European level, I think something like that would have to be done in the same fashion.
Just a couple of slightly different topics, if that's okay. First, regarding the 9 million increase regarding sexual gender-based violence. I was at the presser last week where stats on murders in particular were published for the first time in several years on that. But in the context of the 999 calls controversy, given the investigation into that was based on domestic violence calls predominantly, are you satisfied with how that controversy was handled, that the Gardaí complied to the extent that they could have done with the policing authorities investigator, and that it won't or can't happen again?
Okay. Maybe just to speak to the last point, so this was something that I had asked the policing authority to look at because I was concerned by some, I suppose, information that had come to me. We obviously have an ongoing investigation and a final report that is due to make its way to me shortly. So I think without preempting what's in that, we need to make sure that we learn from what has happened and put whatever structures and resources in place to ensure that that doesn't happen again. I think the Commissioner has been very clear of his commitment in that regard. In fact, tackling domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, even within his own organisation, is a priority that he has been very clear about. So I'll be working with him, and obviously maybe just to await the final report that is due to be with me shortly. The overall increase, you know, if you look at specific funding through the Department of TUSLA, but directly for services, it has gone from maybe 25 to 32 in the last 3 years, and now this is an additional 7 in 1. So I think, and I hope that shows our commitment in not just the current service providers and the work that they do, but also our commitment through the Zero Tolerance Plan to expand on those services and to make sure that, irrespective of where you are, irrespective of what station you walk into, what help you look for, that you will get the same level of support and help. The report that you mentioned, I think for a lot of people in An Garda Síochána, but certainly myself and others, it's not surprising, but I think it's very helpful to have these very clear facts. For the first time last year, the number of homicides were lower than the number of homicides related to domestic incidents. And I just think it shows the challenge that we have and the issue that this really is that needs to be addressed. I could maybe, if I could, maybe pick a positive from the report, and that is the fact that more people are actually reporting. So despite the possible view that what happened with the 999 calls or the issues arising from it would have put people off, we have seen an increase in people going to An Garda Síochána, trusting An Garda Síochána, reporting their crimes, and I think that can only be a good thing. And obviously we need to do more through supporting Victims' Journey and all of the other programmes that we're working on to make sure that even more people come forward. So I do think people still have confidence. Where we can build on that confidence, where we can or need to amend their practices, I have every confidence that that will happen.
And separate topic, if that's okay. There's 2 new data protection commissioners incoming. Could you give an indication of when that process is likely to be complete? And secondly, the process that led to the DOJ to look for 2 new commissioners came after sustained attacks on the DPC, much of them from Europe. I was just wondering, do you think those attacks are in any way warranted or unfair in any way?
Well, we started a process. So last year, when Minister Heather Humphreys was in the role as Minister for Justice, she asked for a review to be done looking at the number of data protection, well, the fact that we had 1 and whether or not there was a requirement to expand. Obviously, the legislation that was initially implemented allowed for up to 3. The report itself came back recommending that we would increase, and that was based simply on the fact that our capacity has increased significantly, or our requirement and the types of cases, the number of cases and the workload of the Data Protection Commission has increased significantly. We have supported that increase as of from this year now, the funding for the Data Protection Commission will have increased sevenfold from when it was first funded back in 2015. The staffing will have increased significantly with that. So this is really about making sure that the Commission can deal with the huge load and the types of cases and the large significant cases that they have, given, I suppose, the particular types of companies and the particular types of cases that they're dealing with in Ireland here, and the one-stop shop and how a lot of that is falling back on them. I met with the Libe Committee last week, actually, who were in Ireland, who also met with the Data Protection Commission, and I was very clear that obviously the work of the Commission is independent to government, and it's very important that as Minister I don't interfere in how that work is done, but what I do and would make clear is that we are here to support and to expand that role, and hope to do so as quickly as possible. So we've engaged with the Public Appointment Service. We're working out with them the terms of, I suppose, the new positions, and then that process will be removed from any political appointment, and that two names will be recommended to me through the Public Appointment Service. And obviously I hope that can happen as soon as possible, but we're just putting the structures around what that job would look like, essentially, and then we will open it up not just within Ireland, but we hope to look at it internationally as well and try and attract as many good people for the roles as possible.
Do you think criticisms from the Libe are warranted to any extent?
I think the criticisms seem to be focused on the length of time, which again, I think when you have such challenging and complex cases, it's not surprising that they are taking, I suppose, a certain period of time. But we have seen more recently quite significant rulings from the Data Protection Commission, and I think from the sounds of it, we'll probably have more significant rulings in the months ahead. But you know, this is a new commission, this is new law. I think everybody is still coming to terms with it and responding to it. But you know, we need to be able to support the Commission, and we're doing so by making sure that they have the funding and the resources that they need to do their work, but also now that we expand to 3 commissioners to be able to deal with that heavy workload.
Minister, can you give us any more detail on some of the specialist equipment that will be bought for An Garda Síochána next year? I'm thinking in particular of the mobile apps and the aircraft. Why would An Garda Síochána need a plane of that sort? And secondly, on the liquor licensing, you mentioned you might have news on that in the coming weeks. How long do you expect that to take to implement? Do you think Christmas parties could be going on until 6 a.m. this year?
So maybe just to break down some of it, so you have 6 million will be provided for ballistic vests, so again that's protective vests for the Gardaí to wear, 3 million for the body-worn cameras. So to break that down, then 2 million of that will be in equipping the stations that will be first rolling out the body-worn cameras and getting that technology in place, and then €1 million for the actual buying of the cameras. We're obviously working on that legislation at the moment and hope to have later on next year pilot stations and Gardaí that would be able to actually wear the body-worn cameras for the first time. The 11 million for mobile devices. I suppose this is new technology that the Gardaí are using, where they have essentially computers in their car, they're connected with apps. It allows them to do their work while out on the beat without having to return to the station. It obviously is more efficient, more effective, but this will hopefully mean that about 3,000 more Gardaí will be able to access this type of equipment, and I was given a great demo of it down at the ploughing this week as well, so there's 11 million specifically for that. The funding for the plane is a replacement plane, but it is something that has, I suppose it is a requirement in terms of surveillance, in terms of security. I think it's important that we have the most up-to-date technology and equipment, and that includes this type of surveillance technology, and that we are in line with our European colleagues and counterparts. We do a huge amount of work with Europol, Interpol, and I think in particular looking at the huge success that the Gardaí have had in recent months dealing with international crime organisations and working very closely with partners right across the world. It is important that we do have the most up-to-date and the most advanced technology, and this is part of it. It's a once-off buy. It's not something you'd be buying every year or even 5 or 10 years, but it is an important part of their overall equipment. Sorry, yes, so I hope to have a bill to Cabinet in the coming weeks, and then obviously once that's published, it will take you know, it will have to go through the houses, it will have to go through committee stage. While we've had engagement with stakeholders already, I expect that there will be further engagement, but obviously would like to see it passed as soon as possible. This is about reforming antiquated and outdated laws. It's about making things more streamlined and creating a better environment for the nighttime economy to be able to sustain itself, because we know of all the sectors it's taken a huge hit, particularly with COVID-19. So it's not just the venues, it's the artists, it's the promoters, it's everybody that's involved in that ecosystem. So it's an important piece of legislation. No, it won't be passed by the end of the year, so we need to publish it and bring it to Cabinet, and then obviously engage through the Justice Committee to have committee stage or pre-legislative scrutiny, and then to bring it through the next stages of the House. So we're looking at next year.
Minister, in relation to the story that's in today's Irish Times about the Association of Garda Superintendents, they mentioned their concerns over members being subjected to false anonymous allegations, and I think close to half of the superintendents that they spoke to said that their reputations have been damaged by such false allegations. Are you concerned over that, and are there any measures that can be taken to protect Gardaí more? And then separately, there was repeated calls over the summer for a public transport police. Is that something that you're considering? Is it something that maybe you could see some of this funding going towards in the next year?
Okay. So I've obviously met with the supers this morning and listened to what they had to say. I listened to the outcome of the survey and the different results from their engagement with their 250 plus members. There are a number of things that we're doing at the moment to try and deal with some of the challenges that they face, but that I think all members of An Garda Síochána face. They mentioned the fact that they were being recorded, that people were making accusations, and obviously it's important that Gardaí are able to get their side across as well. So I think the body-worn cameras are hugely important, not just in helping the guards to do their job and dealing with cases, but making sure that they are safe and that instances are accurately recorded. And I know that's something that they welcome. In terms of two different types of complaints procedures, we obviously have the reform of GSOC, which is very much part of the Policing, Security and Community Safety Bill, and the intention there, and we had funding in the budget for this, is that we will have a new streamlined process so that complaints are dealt with quicker, it's identified whether it's criminal or civil quicker, that we don't have a twin track process, so anybody where there was a complaint made against them, that can be dealt with in a quick and effective manner, and that's obviously been passed or developed through the bill, and we've had huge engagement with the different with An Garda Síochána, who obviously have fed their concerns into the Garda Commissioner and his team. Separate to that then, an internal complaints mechanism is being looked at and reviewed as part of this legislation as well. So this is where you have complaints within An Garda Síochána. The fourth piece then, which was raised with me, was around the protected disclosure. And I suppose what I would say is we have very robust legislation there. It is important that any individual can make a protected disclosure where there are concerns that they want to raise within, be it An Garda Síochána or other agencies. But I suppose the most important thing is that, again, we have a system that deals with these complaints quickly and effectively, and that we do protect those who are involved, particularly if it is a false allegation. But you know, I know Deeper did a review last year of the legislation itself. And I'm not sure if there are any recommendations to make any changes, but I think it's something that always has to be kept under consideration. I've certainly heard what the superintendents and others have said this morning. But I think there's a number of different elements that are in train and that will be changed and implemented in the coming months and years, and I hope that will respond to some of the challenges that they're facing. Yes, so this is something I've spoken to the Garda Commissioner about a number of times. I appreciate that there have been incidents that I suppose have raised concern with people travelling on public transport. It is a matter for the Garda Commissioner to decide where resources go and whether or not you would have a specialised unit. What he is very clear, and I suppose he has engaged extensively with the different public transports, from the DART, the Lewis, Dublin bus, rural buses and others, is that there is often certain times and certain areas where we need an increased presence, and that's something that he's looking at and something we're working with him on, where there could be an increased presence on certain types of public transport at certain times, without necessarily developing a specific dedicated transport police, because I think the overall figures show that in the vast majority of journeys that are taken, there are very few incidents and very few needs for An Garda Síochána, but obviously where there are and where there are problem areas, we need to be able to respond specifically to that, and that's where his priority is. It's something that he's working on at the moment, so hopefully he'll be able to come back to me with a proposal very soon, but I don't have an exact timeline.
Shane, just one last question.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in again on the domestic violence funding. Is it possible to give us a bit more information on you know, what are we going to get for this extra 9 million? Are we going to be, how much closer are we going to be to meeting, say, for example, the Istanbul Convention standards? Are we going to still have counties where there are no refuges? You know, what are we getting for this 9 million?
Well, this is a start, I suppose, of what is a 5-year plan. And you'll appreciate the 9 million will now go into the base. So over the next 5 years, that's obviously a significant amount of money, which will then hopefully be increased upon next year and the year after and the year after that, separate to a capital budget, which is being committed through the Department of Housing and the CAS process. Breaking down the 9 million exactly, we have 5.75, which is there for current and existing services. So acknowledging that they have experience the same increase in costs as anybody else, so there'll be specific funding for the 6% inflation increase. There'll be supports for them to be able to expand their services, because we know that those current services could do much more. You'll have 900,000 specifically for the rape crisis centres, again, who have asked for that. You then have 1.13, which is around new service, so preparatory steps. So this is then what will really feed into the Istanbul Convention and the targets. We have a situation where we have 9 counties without a refuge or accommodation, but also there is no blueprint, shall we say, for anybody delivering or developing a refuge or accommodation. There's no exact blueprint as to the type of accommodation you should have, the type of ancillary services or supports. So we have been working, our own department, with Children with TUSLA and Housing, and the organisations, the NGOs, to develop that blueprint so that it's a much quicker process when we go to develop, say, in the 9 counties, but also other areas that need to expand. And what's helpful is that we have 3 services currently, one in Navan, Dundalk and Wexford, that are already in the stage of developing and expanding those services. So we're working with them and able to use that as a template for any future development. We have 790,000 is going to develop that's the management. 240,000 is for additional 5 safe houses next year. So that process is well underway. And then you have 100,000, which is following on Airbnb and hotel accommodation that has been provided through COVID-19, but which has been particularly helpful. So that will work with the different refuges. As I said, that will allow us to put in place structures to have a better template in the development of the new accommodation, the doubling of accommodation that we've committed to over the next 5 years. You also then have 450,000, which is going towards the establishment of the agency, who will essentially take on this role once it's established in 2024. We have 750,000 around awareness raising campaigns, so campaigns like the Still Here, the No Excuses, developing of a consent campaign and other types of campaigns that are part of our strategy. And then the victims of crime funding has increased from 5 million up to almost 6 million, so that supports not just domestic, sexual and gender-based violence victims, but the vast majority of the organisations do, and they receive funding for everything from victim support at court to helplines to various different other supports. So the 9 million, 7 million of that is increasing, so 32 million that was with TUSLA, that is still with TUSLA but is now in the Justice vote, is increasing to 41, and obviously that's the base. So next year, when we will hopefully get even more money, that will increase time and time again. So the cumulative effect is that we will be spending in the region of about 363 million between new services, between justice supports, between accommodation. But this first year is really about putting the building blocks in place, putting the blueprints in place, getting the teams in place, and getting the agency up and running, which will do a lot of this work then.
And is that 5 years to get to Istanbul standards, or are we looking at exceeding those
No, we won't. We won't have reached the full number after the 5 years. What we've committed to is doubling the number of refuge accommodation that we have, but we're doing that being realistic. That we have to put these building blocks in place. That we want to get this right. We're working very closely with the sector, who I think supports the manner and the timeline in which we are doing this. But I think once we can actually get this in motion over the next year or two, it will be much easier to increase those targets and to reach the higher numbers beyond that. So this is a 5-year strategy. There will be another strategy, because obviously this has built on the previous 2. This is our 3rd national strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence.
Take one more question from Conor, right, then after that. Nobody else, any questions?
Thanks. Just on the Garda surveillance aircraft, the Defence Forces bought 4 PC-12 aircraft, which I understand would be well suited to these surveillance needs, and while they got a lot of use during COVID, some of them are spending more time in hangars than in the air. Has there been any discussion or consideration of getting one of those aircraft from the Defence Forces for the Garda purposes?
Well, look, what I would say is that the Gardaí and the Defence Forces work very closely in this area, whether it's security matters or surveillance. The Defence Forces sought and have the 4 because that's what they require for the work that they do. An Garda Síochána have sought for the replacement of this 1 plane because that is what they feel they require for the work that they do. But there is close cooperation, so I don't think there's or has been any suggestion that they would be able to borrow or to use any of the Defence Forces planes. It is something that they need themselves for the work that they're doing, but they do work closely in cooperation with each other. So obviously, you know, without getting into details or perhaps knowing some of the details, different programs or different operations they'd be running, they would be working closely together.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Okay, thanks guys.